So welcome everyone, and thank you for joining. The role of transnational organized crime and corruption is reporting a risk or an opportunity, the case of Europe. I am Ana Paula Oliveira, an analyst with the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime. For those who are hearing about us for the first time, the GI is an independent civil society organization with headquarters in Geneva, Switzerland, and offices in Austria, Malta, South Africa, and representation in Nairobi and New York. The GI's work spans across a wide variety of issues related to organized crime, including all types of criminal markets. It provides a platform to promote greater debate and innovative strategies to highlight and reduce the impact of organized crime and illicit markets. This event is organized together with our partner Libera, Association's Names and Numbers Against Mafias. Libera is a network of institutions committed to the fight against mafias, corruption, and crime, but also committed to fight for social justice, the seek for truth, protection of rights, and transparency. Some housekeeping rules before we kick off. Please keep your microphones and cameras turned off during the presentations. Only the speakers will have their cameras and microphones on. Feel free to address all the questions you have in the chat box. I will do my best to group them all and address to the panelists at the end of the presentations. I would like to remind you as well that this event is being recorded. The discussion we will have today is a big and an important one. Corruption is a systemic problem and one that happens everywhere. The global initiative's Assassination Witness campaign have shown that exposing and denouncing corruption comes with a great risk. Journalists, activists, politicians are threatened and killed for voicing up concerns over corruption and organized crime. Take the example of journalist Ahmed Devela, who was shot dead in 2019 in Ghana for reporting on corruption and organized crime in the sports industry. Or in my home country, Brazil, where corruption and organized crime poses one of our biggest challenges for development and justice. Marielle Franco, who was a spokeswoman, councilwoman, and openly criticized corruption and organized crime in Rio, was killed by gunmen. But corruption not only puts a risk on those reporting on it, corruption enables organized crime to permeate in governmental institutions, including the judiciary, putting a bar in investigation, prosecuting, and adjudicating these killings, but also the crimes behind it. Criminal actors with strong ties to state officials operate in the certainty that these cases will end up in impunity. At the same time, corrupted institutions also allowed criminal justice actors to work in a very hostile environment where they feel threatened, unsafe, and ultimately can get killed. Although corruption is a global phenomenon, it has affected Europe particularly recently. Murders of journalists Daphne Caruana Galizia in Malta and Jan Kuczyak in Slovakia have raised concerns about corruption and organized crime in the continent. Both of the cases unveil the strong connections between organized criminal groups and high-level officials in the government, including the judiciary. And to discuss the risk on exposes corruption and organized crime, and also the role of judiciary integrity at the European level, we have today Pavla Okolova. She's a member of Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project since 2013, and she's a regional editor for Central Europe. She's an investigative journalist and founder of the independent outlet Investigace.cz. Pavla has contributed to major cross-border projects such as the Panama Papers, the Paradise Papers, the Russian laundromat, and the Azerbaijani laundromat. Together with her colleague Jan Kuczyak, Pavla has exposed ties between the Slovak government and the Italian mafia. In 2018, Pavla was selected European Young Leaders Initiative. We are also honored to have with us today Judge Antonio Balsamo, who has been serving as an international judge of the Kosovo Specialist Chambers in The Hague since 2017, and as a legal advisor of the Permanent Mission of Italy for the United Nations in Vienna. Before that, he has served as a Deputy Prosecutor General of the Italian Supreme Court of Cassation and as a President of the Court of Assisi, presiding the new trials concerning the Capaci massacre and the Via d'Amelio massacre, in which judges Giovanni Falcone and Paolo Borsellino were killed. We are also delighted to introduce Professor Alberto Vanucci, a professor of political science at the Department of Political Science of University of Pisa. His main research fields are the analysis of political and administrative corruption and its interactions with organized crime, anti-corruption policy, new institutional theory, and the Italian political system. He has authored more than 150 academic publications, among them books such as Corrupt Exchanges and The Hidden Order of Corruption. Since 2010, he is the director of the Master Program in Analysis, Prevention, and Fight Against Corruption and Organized Crime, organized by the University of Pisa in partnership with Libera and the universities of Turin, Naples, and Palermo. He's also an advisor on anti-corruption strategies in many institutions, including Libera. And to finish this panel discussing new initiatives to combat corruption moving forward in Europe, Giulia Norbetti, project manager of the EU Monitor, will present the new project developed in partnership with Mafia 9 Danke, Libera, and other organizations from Germany, France, and Italy, which aims to provide new and innovative educational methods to involve and empower young professionals in the fight against corruption in Europe. Thank you all for joining today, and Pavla, the floor is yours.
Hello, thank you for the invitation. I'm going to talk about a case of assassination and of my colleague Jan Kuczyak, who was assassinated in 2018. It's almost 3 years now, and actually what the murder brought to Slovakia. Just to begin with, there are more reporters and journalists killed because of reporting on corruption than there are people or journalists killed because of reporting on war. So it's super dangerous job, and also reporting on corruption is probably the most challenging, because if you want to report on corruption, you have two sides of the story, and none of the people involved actually want to disclose any details, how it works, why they received or why they given the bribe, and what was the benefit of it, because both parties actually profit from corruption. That's why they don't want to talk about it, that's why they don't want to disclose. But back to the case of Jan Kuczyak, it was hard to imagine that the situation in Slovakia, and I'm talking about political situation, would change only, let's say, 3 years ago. There was a strong political party called Smer that was actually winning all, evaluations and exit polls, and it was hard to imagine that they would ever be that the preferences of people for choosing this party would ever drop. But then in February 2018, Jan Kuczyak was assassinated because of together with his fiancée Martina. They were both very young, 27 years. They didn't have any, special secret sources. They didn't have any political ties. He didn't report on some political party more favorably than the others. So it was a big question what actually made him being the target of this assassination. After about 9 months, 3 people were arrested, and one of them started to cooperate with the police. Those were the people who actually pulled the trigger, and one of them mentioned that the guy who ordered the assassination is a Slovak businessman, Jan Kuczyak. Jan Kuczyak was quite known businessman because he was doing all kinds of shady deals and always kind of evaded the justice. He was quite known for it. He was also known for his ties to justice and for his ties to politics. So the police also detained Jan Kuczyak, and when they detained him, they didn't find much because he was not the newcomer to such situations. But what was more important, that one of his close collaborators, he brought his cell phone to the police. The cell phone included some of the most explosive material or some of the most sensitive material that actually describe the system of corruption and blackmailing Marian Kočner was running for ages in Slovakia for, let's say, something like 20 years. Because he was this kind of a guy who was really strict regarding the rule plata o plomo, or bribe, or enforce you to do something by blackmailing. He had a lot of compromising material on people from judiciary, on some of the police investigators. He has very good links to police sources, and he also has his links to politicians. So, because he was kind of a light-hearted in this way, he needed to kept this archive of compromising material, including the messages he exchanged with the judiciary and law enforcers on his phone as a backup. So police, once they got to the phone, they had no idea what they are actually holding in their hands. And what it turned out to be, there were even quite a big pressures on the investigators to actually not include this cell phone and this backup of the cell phone to the evidence, because actually the police body was the police corps. It was they were quite aware what it can mean and what it can bring to Slovakia. Because of the messages that were there, those messages were encrypted, but the police got hands on the password to get into the phone. So they decrypted the messages, and they found out that actually there were a couple of the judges working for Marian Kočner. They were ruling in his favor, and he was giving them money, he was bribing them. Then the first judge started to cooperate with the police, and actually in his police testimonies described the system. And the outcome of this cell phone or of this investigation is that recently Slovakia is great case study how the corruption and how the mafia state can work. Recently there are over 20 judges being prosecuted for abuse of their power and corruption. There are 2 former police presidents of Slovak police who are being detained and are awaiting they are in pre-trial detention. There are at least 4 prosecutors being actually prosecuted for corruption and blackmailing, and the situation changed completely. There is the new government, the Smer party is not ruling anymore, and the preferences are dropping in quite a manner that was never expected before. And yeah, it's actually the whole judiciary and law enforcement is that there's ongoing revolution, and all those people who were enablers of corruption in the judiciary are now being prosecuted or detained. Well, so far, not all of them, but a big part of them. Those who were quite some time untouchables are now spending time in pre-trial detentions. That's it.
Thank you very much, Pavla. In fact, Slovakia is, as you said, a great case study for all these topics that we are discussing today. And I would like to remind you, if you want to look at Jan Kuczjak's profile, go to our website, assassination.globalinitiative.net. And I would like to turn now to Judge Balsamo, who will give us a deep dive in the judiciary and all these related issues of corruption and organized crime.
Yes, thank you very much for your invitation. I would like to specify that I am participating in the panel discussion essentially on the basis of my experience as a magistrate who worked extensively in Sicily dealing with the mafia trials, and not in my capacity as a judge of the Kosovo specialist chambers. Indeed, I think that the Italian experience offers some important lessons and also some signs of hope for the future on the topic on which our discussion focuses. I would like to present to you some reflections on this topic, starting with the reconstruction of one of the most serious criminal facts of our recent history, which was the subject of judgment in one of the last trials I presided over, precisely the killing of Judge Giovanni Falcone, a man whose work and sacrifice paved the way for the adoption of the United Nations Convention against transnational organized crime, as recognized in the resolution approved last October by the Conference of the Parties. Speaking of the killing of politicians opposed to the mafia, such as the president of Sicily, Piersanti Mattarella, Giovanni Falcone himself said, "People like this generally die because they are alone or because they have entered into too big a game. People often die because they don't have the necessary alliances, because they lack support. In Sicily, the mafia hits the servants of the state that the state has failed to protect." His words sound prophetic, even with respect to the reasons behind the Capaci massacre in which he was killed. In the final judgments already issued, it was highlighted that the Capaci massacre represents the point of convergence between two fundamental trends in the evolution of organized crime. The first is the strategy of mafia terrorism, which aimed to strike terror into the community and to heavily destabilize the state structure in view of the search for new institutional representatives. The second consists of a preventive purpose, that is to avoid that Giovanni Falcone, once appointed national anti-mafia prosecutor, could give a particular boost to investigations into the link between organized crime and corruption, thus compromising the new relationships between Cosa Nostra and its supports in the economic and political sectors. A few months before being murdered, Giovanni Falcone highlighted the connection between an increasingly violent organized crime and an increasingly bold white-collar crime, based on strong expectations of impunity, and pointed out that illicit control of public tenders dates back to many decades ago, but today it has reached an impressive size. It does not matter whether the company that won the tender is Sicilian, Calabrian, French, or German. Thus, an evidence-based approach shows that a close link between organized crime and corruption creates a very large space for the assassination of even the most important criminal justice actors. But there is another lesson, no less important, that comes from the Italian experience. And I would like to explain it starting from my personal experience. I wore the judicial robe for the first time in one night, the night of 24 of May 1992, when I and the other Chinese judges were picketing in honor of Giovanni Falcone, his wife Francesca Morvillo, and their escort agents in front of their mangled bodies in the Palace of Justice of Palermo. I believe that that night, that those tragical events marked for the entire judiciary and all institutions the starting point of an unanimous awareness of the need to put an end to the impunity of the mafia and all its accomplices hidden in the economic and institutional world. From that moment on, no one could pretend not to understand what the real stakes were within the judiciary. Not only were corruption and cowardice no longer allowed, but even irresponsible divisions on the approach to be taken on the fight against the mafia were rightly stigmatized for their effect of isolating the magistrate operating on the front line. No compromise was possible anymore. It was a judicial reaction accompanied by an important growth, also and above all in the social and cultural field. Precisely in that historical phase, I believe that the seeds of a new alliance between criminal justice institutions and civil society against organized crime and its links with the corruption system have been planted in the minds of many people. It is meaningful that just in the years immediately following, some of the most significant expressions of civil society, such as Libera, developed new forms of participation in the most important functions of the state, also by presenting the bill, which was then approved by the Italian parliament and gave rise to the model of the reuse of confiscated assets for social purposes. Such a model is based on the consideration of the disposal of confiscated assets as a form of compensation for communities that have been damaged by the most serious criminal phenomena. It aims to promote a synergy between culture of lawfulness and economic development. And it is very significant that this perspective has been mentioned in two resolutions approved by the latest conferences of parties to GI-TOC and UNCAC as a model that all states are encouraged to take into account in their respective national regulations. If the pandemic creates new opportunities of infiltration for some of the most insidious criminal phenomena, it is also creating the conditions for the growth of a shared awareness at an international level of the need to address the economic dimension of the same phenomena, also through innovative forms of judicial cooperation and an overall modernization of investigation techniques as part of a comprehensive strategy aimed at combating both organized crime and corruption on a common base. In the end, it is no coincidence that the perception of transnational organized corruption is increasingly widespread, and that the Palermo Convention is widely considered as the main global tool available to the international community to prevent and fight also new, emerging and evolving forms of collective crime. The GI-TOC was signed in Palermo in December 2000, but at tomorrow. It is increasingly proving to be a great factor of innovation, a universal regulatory framework designed with a view to the future. Indeed, its leading role and relevance to law in action have been understood by judges and prosecutors in many countries, including Italy, much more today than it was 20 years ago. We are witnessing the spread of a common culture and of a shared awareness of the real extent of the common problems to be faced, similarly to that change in the collective way of thinking that in Italy has led to a joint commitment in addressing a criminal emergency that has no longer been considered to concern only traditional settlement areas. And it is meaningful that the 10th conference of the parties to the GI-TOC was participated by expressions of the civil society, such as Libera, the Global Initiative, the Falcone Foundation, the Pio La Torre Center, and led to the adoption of a resolution that was immediately referred to by institutional communication and by the media as the Falcone Resolution, a resolution that makes a clear choice in favor of a cultural approach that considers the fight against organized crime as an essential step to guarantee the human rights and fundamental freedoms of all, in particular the most vulnerable people. The vision of the fight against the transnational crime today welcomed by the United Nations is fully consistent with an international of criminal law implemented through a framework of guarantees in which the right to truth and the revolution of dignity are extended to a universal dimension in a way that includes the collective right to hope for the strengthening of rule of law and democracy as a means of protection for everyone against organized violence. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Judge Balsamo, for this insightful presentation and for the walkthrough for all these years and explaining so much for us the issues of organized crime and the judiciary. I would like now to turn the floor for Professor Alberto Vanucci, who will also give his presentation.
Thank you. Good morning. Good morning to everybody. Thank you for your invitation and for organizing this interesting seminar. I will try to share PowerPoint presentation. Let me see if it works. Can you see it? Is it okay?
Yes, it's working. Thank you.
Perfect. So, the previous contribution were quite emotional. I will try to be more connected to the research, to what we know about the relationship between corruption, especially in the judiciary, and the effect, the impact on the rule of law and, of course, on the activity of organized crime. Well, first slide. Let me start from here. Okay. Well, when we are talking about corruption in the criminal justice system, we have to consider that there are many actors, many public actors that can be involved in it. Judges, for sure, prosecutors, but also police agents, prisons officers, lawyers, and different private actors as well can be involved in corruption in the judiciary. And especially those who have resources to be put on the table, so to say, which means illegality skills, the ability to operate under the table, social connections, money. And so among these private actors, we have, of course, white collars, entrepreneurs, and criminal organizations, who very often play a leading role in corruption in the judiciary. So when we are talking about corruption in the judiciary, we have to consider that we are talking about very different phenomena. So we can have corruption as a petty corruption, which means, for instance, a small gift to smuggle something into a prison, but also grand corruption. And when we consider the case of judicial and prosecutor corruption, the value of resources at stake is generally very high. So we are in the realm of grand corruption, where what enter into play are verdicts, preferential treatment, falsified or suppression of evidence, confidential information, influence over or distortion of investigation, and so on. And when we enter in the field of grand corruption, we know that this kind of corruption requires rules, because there are high risks involved and potentially also high benefits. So for the actors involved, careful decisions have to be taken. Who can be trusted, who cannot be trusted. Very often we observe the presence of specialized actors who can provide information, protection, contacts, and also the enforcement of corrupt exchanges. And among those actors, we observe very often brokers, middlemen, and also organized crime and mafia particularly. So, straight to the point, the adverse effect of corruption, why we have to worry, and we have to worry a lot about corruption in the judiciary. First of all, straightforward, corruption in the judiciary undermines the rule of law. When bribes are paid, there is no impartiality in prosecutors' activities and in judges' rulings, of course. So, no rule of law when there is corruption, but since the guarantee of right, the fulfillment of rules, of laws, of obligations depends on money and personal connection, we have another adverse effect. The citizen confidence in the judicial system is undermined as well. And this increases a sense of disillusion, and there is a sort of disincentive to the recourse of public justice. So in this case, we observe that the wealth, individuals' wealth, and their willingness to pay, as well as personal relationships, rule in courts. So there is no objective and equal enforcement of law. On the contrary, there is an increase in uncertainty in all markets and in social relationships as well. And of course, there is a huge burden in terms of economic development, less exchanges, less investments, less productive activities, as well as more generally, and I would say even more importantly, on the quality of social life. There is a sort of veil of uncertainty when we know that judges can be corrupted. It's not the case if in Italy, according to the criminal code, corruption in the judiciary has harsher sanctions than the ordinary form of corruption. Moreover, due to the lack of trust in tribunals, there is an increase in the demand for alternative forms of protection, private protection. And in certain areas, for instance, in Italy, in southern Italy, mafia-like criminal organization can meet this demand for private protection. So in the void, in the absence of state legitimacy, mafia organization and criminal organization more generally increase their power and their authority. Moreover, And this is a very dangerous point. When we have corruption in the criminal justice system, we have a weakening of the effectiveness of public prosecution and repression against all other criminal activities, and among them corruption itself. So there is the risk of a vicious circle starting and getting into motion, as I will show later. Well, some data, very briefly. There is an interesting Eurobarometer poll, according to which, 2017, the giving of bribes and the abuses of power for personal gain are widespread in the courts, in tribunals, in their country, for, on average, 23% of European citizens, and in police and other connected area for 31%. Especially in Slovakia, Slovenia, and Hungary, the judiciary is considered as one of the sectors in those countries where corruption is mostly widespread. In the case of Italy, corruption is considered widespread by 29% of citizens. Another data, not taken from Eurobarometer, but from another research. In 2019, in Italy, there were 36 cases of corruption involving, or with the alleged involvement of judges, more or less the same number of the previous years. So that's quite a lot, I would say. Another information taken from this interesting survey. Are there enough successful prosecution in your country to deter people from corrupt practices? Well, mistrust in the capability of the judiciary to successfully prosecute corruption is quite high. On average, 53% of European citizens do not believe that there are enough successful prosecution to deter people from corrupt practices in their country. And only 33% believe that prosecutions are effective enough. There are higher percentage of mistrust is in Slovenia, 71%, and quite surprisingly, I have to admit, there is a higher trust, the highest percentage is in Romania of trust, is 55%. My final, and I would say core argument, there is a basic, fundamental, vicious circle which is generated by corruption in criminal justice. Of course, we have seen that there is a lot of mistrust in the effectiveness of in the prosecution of corruption crimes. But the causes, the factors, this mistrust can be different. An effectiveness of norms and regulation, the lack of resources which are allocated to the judiciary, well, the fact that corrupt agents are smart enough to keep their activities hidden, and so on. But among these factors, for the ineffectiveness of the ability of judges to prosecute corruption, there is also the fact that we know that corruption can be diffused also among judges and other criminal justice operators. So that's one of the causes. But when corruption in the judiciary enters into play, we have a very negative and long-lasting impact on the profitability of any other illegal activity, which can start a very dangerous vicious circles. Let's go into the detail. Corrupt agents, but more generally criminals and the criminal organization particularly, have the resources needed, which means money, illicit proceeds, and social relationships, but they have also incentives and competence to at least try to corrupt those who should or could denounce, prosecute, and sanction their illegal activities. So when you observe a higher level of corruption in general terms, or any other illegal activities, especially organized crime, in a certain country, in every sector, public procurement, health system, social security, and so on, we also have an increase in the demand for corruption in the criminal justice, since obviously this is a basic strategy to try to escape punishment and to obtain impunity for other crimes. So when we have an higher demands, market laws, that means that the price of corruption increases as well. So the value of bribes that can be paid to judges, to the police, to prosecutors. So there is a strong incentive for them to be involved in corruption. And when this demand for corrupt services is met by the supply of criminal justice agents, so there is corruption in the criminal justice system, courts, police, and so on, there is a higher probability of impunity for those involved in other corrupt practices. So corrupt and more generally illegal activities become more profitable since there is a lower risk of denials or conviction for actors involved. Consequently, we can expect an increase in the overall practice of corruption, which in turn reflects an increased demand for corruption in the criminal justice sector to obtain impunity. And there are huge economies of scale in the repeated corrupt exchanges with the same counterpart, judges, prosecutors, who are willing to take bribes and whose reliability has been ascertained in the past. And criminal groups, of course, are stable clients for corrupt officials. So, to sum up, corruption in the criminal justice is fostered by the practice of corruption in other contexts, and it is a multiplier of corruption as well as of other illegal activities in all other sectors of society, the politics, the institution, the markets. A final point. This vicious circle becomes stronger when corruption in the judiciary meets organized crime. Because it's true that corruption in the judiciary is a multiplier of corruption in other illegal activities, but when organized crime is involved, and the mafia organizations particularly, this multiplication process accelerates exponentially. There is a fatal attraction of criminal organization toward corrupt practices that can organize also by itself, by the way. But when there is corruption, there is a sort of symbiotic relationships between corruption and organized crime. But criminal organization can play a twofold role in the corruption market. The first, and quite obvious, they are ideal corruptors. They have illicit capitals to be converted into bribes. They have expertise, interest, no moral scruple or barrier. So they can increase profit in every sector, public procurement, and so on. They dismantle criminal competition. They obtain favors, a lot of different favors that are useful for their illegal activities. But they demand also impunity, protection, so a shield against judicial inquiries and the state repression. Therefore, the corruption of judges and prosecutors, when possible, is an exceptionally effective strategy. Cosa Nostra in Sicily, before the Falcone and Borsellino maxi trial, and many other cases in Italy exemplify this situation. So, a stable, long-standing actor in the legal market, like criminal and mafia organization, have a precise interest in establishing this lasting relationship with judges willing to accept bribes. And moreover, mafia organization can also have another role in the corruption market. They can provide protection. They can enforce corrupt deals, making corruption more stable and orderly functioning. Mafia organization play the role of the informal tribunal of the underworld, who enforce rules and illegal deals, also in corruption. So, final slide. The corruption potential of criminal groups, of criminal organization, discourages other criminals, citizens, and media to expose, denounce, and cooperate with the judiciary, since judges are considered likely to be corruptible. And in the worst case scenario, corrupt judges or other public officials in the judiciary sector, in the criminal justice sector, can pass to criminal groups useful information to menace or eliminate the complaints or witnesses. So, for criminal groups, the corruptibility of judges and prosecutors and public officials in the criminal justice sector becomes one of the criteria, a very relevant one indeed, to locate one's criminal activity and illegal markets. Therefore, we can expect the transnational organized criminal organization will prefer to move where they expect to be able to easily corrupt public officials, therefore reinforcing this vicious circle, which makes corruption even more pervasive. And so corrupt countries, especially when they're corrupt in their judiciary sector, will tend to become even more corrupt and prone to illegality a long time. So we have to break up this vicious circle. That's I think the main target of any effective anti-corruption policy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Alberto Vannucci, for this very insightful and in-depth overview of all the relationship between organized crime and corruption in the judiciary. I think we all learned a lot from your presentation. Thank you. And we have seen how those fatal relationships between organized crime and corruption can lead to assassinations and killings, as the previous presentations have shown to us. So to end our discussion today, presenting some new initiatives and good practices moving forward in the fight against corruption and organized crime, I would turn the floor to Giulia Norbetti from Mafia 9 Danke. Please, Giulia, you can start your presentation. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Ana Paula, and the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime and Libera, of course. I'm really glad to complete this round of presentations following so engaged and super experienced professionals from different fields. And I'm also glad to introduce the project you monitor as our very little contribution for youth education and civil society participation and activation in the fight against organized crime and corruption at international level. Just to give you a little background information, I'm calling from Berlin, since I'm part of the association Mafia 9 Danke. That is a German association based here in Berlin with some active groups in Munich and Cologne and some other active people from all over Germany. And the association exists since 2007 and thrives through events, research projects, information activities, advocacy, networking to make this presence of organized crime and mafia phenomena in the country more visible and to inform the public and the politics and institutions about the long-term risks related to this phenomena. And we are a small association, but quite active, and we are also proudly part of a network at EU level that it's called CHANCE, and CHANCE stands for Civil Hub Against Organized Crime in Europe. And there were already some attempts before to create a European network against organized crime in Europe that didn't work well. But since 2016, we are now really engaged and active, working together, especially thanks to the first input of the Italian association Libera that is also coordinating this event. And we have to decided to try to start rethinking our commitment at European level, creating a horizontal network of different kind of associations, organizations, informal groups, movements, and also individual active people that want to commit themselves for these values and these ideals. And so since the end of 2016, more or less, we started with some other partners to talk about what do we actually need from the civil society point of view at European level, and how can we actually reach it with our little energies and little opportunities and possibilities. And then we brought together people from Italy, from France, from Germany, from Belgium, Spain, Switzerland, UK, Malta, Bulgaria, and now the countries are coming, and we have more and more representatives from kind of almost all over Europe. And after 2 years working together, trying to exchange best practices, organizing educational workshops on some specific thematic issues, sharing ideas, and also developing an internal strategic planning, we arrive to the project U-Monitor. Like we presented last year in April to the European Parliament our political agenda that collects kind of all in 15 points all the main issues that we think should be addressed at European level. And such as, I don't know, the revision of the definition of organized crime at European level, or a greater protection of the right to information, protection of journalists, and the civic form of the right to know, and the strengthening of European programs in these fields. And let's say, building on these points, we also try to develop together some projects, some common projects, and I'm glad to present this, the last one that we are currently starting. Like it started in December this year, and it's called U-Monitor, and that stands for Empowering Youth to Build Monitorial Communities Against Corruption. It's an Erasmus Plus K-Action 2 project, so it's dedicating especially to youth education. It will last a little more than 2 years and brings together 7 organizations from France, Germany, and Italy. In this case, it's Mafia named Danke as leading partner, together with Eine Welt Leipzig. And then in France, we have the Man Libre and Échange Partenariat. And then in Italy, we have Libera, we have Gruppo Belle, and we have the University of Pisa, where Professor Vannucci was talking just before me. Yeah, the idea is to bring together different organizations. Some will bring more the thematic expertise. So the content-wise, let's say, you have seen before me also what Professor Vannucci was presenting. There are a lot of materials, a lot of interesting information that needs to be addressed more. The thing is that sometimes this expertise stays in a field of experts, journalists, judges, institutions, politics, but doesn't reach the educational field. And these topics might be quite complex and very abstract, and it's very complicated to find the right methods to bring those messages really to young people. And for this reason, we are bringing together these organizations that have the expertise together with the organizations that have the methodological competence, so that they usually work with youth and they know how to transform also complex messages in something that can have an impact and can engage young citizens. The topics that will be addressed by the project are really many and wide, and range from civic engagement, culture of integrity, social cohesion, right to know, freedom of information, and in general, the care of the common good and understanding this concept of common good, and the participation, active participation of youth. And everything will be built on this idea of monitorial communities. That is a method that is particularly successfully developed from our partner in Italy, Libera and Gruppo Belle. And the idea is that it's really nice, the possibility to be, as a citizen, an active participant to the democratic life, having an insight how the public money is spent, and also knowing which tools are available to all citizens, also to young citizens, to participate to this life. And the project will then create these 3 simplified guides and 3 educational tools, bringing together very different methodologies that range from theater to games and role games and campaigning techniques and these kind of things, to try really to reach youth and engage them and commit them to be active citizens against corruption, and to become also activists and leading activists against corruption. Yeah, unfortunately, I still don't have much to present you, because as I said, we just started, and we will work together for 2 years. And we will produce these materials that will be open licensed in 4 languages. So we will work together in English, and then it will be in German, French, and Italian as a starting point, because we hope that this will be just a first step, and that we will increase then the offer and develop more and more materials. and they will be available. And of course, we will try to spread them as much as possible and engage as many youth workers as possible to bring further this goal. You can follow the project on the social media. We have already a Facebook page and Instagram account. If you are also in these socials, at YouMonitor Project is the name. And of course, you can always write me for more information. And also, if you want to be active in this international network, we are always looking for new contacts, and we would be really glad to get new activists. Yes.
Thank you very much, Julia, for presenting this new project. Thank you for your work on this. It's very interesting, and I think it's a great step to involve youth in the fight against corruption. So I will, for the sake of time, as we are running to the end of the panel, I will try to group the questions. And please, if I don't address all of the questions, I would like to thank you all, the audience, for all the questions you have sent. Contact us by email, and I will go back to you with the answer. But perhaps I will start with you, Julia, since you last finished your presentation. One of the questions posed was how, due to the importance of all these discussions we are having today, how you can make a vivid model in education, so how youth could grow up with an overview that we should fight against corruption, and how we will empower youth in this sense.
I already deactivated the audio. Yeah, I think that the method is really important, and it's a central point to communicate these kind of topics, because my feeling is that the risk is that these topics of, I don't know, things such money laundering or corruption at institutional level, they seem so abstract, so far away, so not so interesting, and not so global also issues, that you cannot do anything as a young person against these things. But I really think that if we actually show which tools are available, and if we push a bit on the idealistic side that most of the youth actually have, we can reach really interesting solutions and results. Because one example that we always think is the movement Friday for Future, for example. Of course, it's focusing on the environmental issue, but if we think what this movement has already reached in terms of sensibilization, and also how widespread this movement became, I think that we cannot underestimate the energy that can be in a youth movement, and that young people can bring. So same as the environmental issue, that it's also quite an abstract thing. I think that corruption, anti-corruption, and active citizenship in this context also have a lot of potential. And yeah, we should be also positive and have some trust that something can change. Otherwise, let's say nothing will start.
Thank you, Julia. And also, I received some questions here regarding legislation. More than one question asking if the discourse on corruption is a little bit behind in comparison to the progress in legislation, and if we would look and to have sort of like an international anti-corruption court. So I would like to hear perhaps from Judge Balsamo and from Professor Vannucci on this point. Professor Vannucci, can I start with you?
Of course, I'm here, ready. Okay, I think I also read the chat, so I anticipated your questions. Well, there is a first interesting point on the reliability of surveys on corruption, of the Eurobarometer survey. Very quickly, they don't. Such polls don't give us the reality of corruption. since they try to state how much people is worried about corruption and perceive that corruption is diffused in different institutions in their countries. But what these polls provide is a very useful information, because it's true that not in every country there is the same perception of a gift as acceptable, of what is the threshold after which we can recognize a bribe, and below that threshold maybe that's acceptable. That's different. There is a very cultural bias in our conception of corruption. But nevertheless, this post gives us a wide range perspective on what is the level of alarm, the red flags on the perceived manifestation of abuses in that sector, in that country. And that's interesting in itself. The other question that's a very interesting one, I won't enter into the question of legislation. That's Antonio Balsamo, that I'm glad to meet at least virtually here, and warmly greet. The question of how to manage the possibility of an international anti-corruption court, especially in the case of grand corruption. And that's a very, very interesting point, because we define corruption as an abuse of public power in the case of public corruption for private gain. That's the more general definition provided by Transparency International, and which is commonly accepted internationally. Well, where can we recognize, and when can we recognize an abuse? When the whole state apparatus is converted into a giant tool to gain profits. When we have not a very grand corruption, so kleptocracy, that's the name it is called, the ruling of the thieves. When those in power use the state apparatus to gain profits. That's the case of certain autocrats mainly in developing countries. So how can we state that there is corruption in those countries where there is no violation of laws, because laws are, corrupted in themselves, and the operation of the government, of the state, is aimed at extracting resources from the collectivity. It's sort of predatory activity of the government against the society. So in those cases, we have two different anti-corruption strategies. One, very difficult, from below. That's and the revolution is needed. There is no free electoral process to have better rulers in that case. I hope a pacific revolution, a non-violent revolution, but that's what is needed, civic revolution. But there is another strategy from a top-down strategy, and that's the role of international organization. And I agree. I'm not sure that an international anti-corruption tribunal, so the multiplication of international tribunals can be a good strategy. But I agree that, for instance, considering corruption on that scale, on that huge scale, as a form of violation of human rights, of basic human rights, so corruption, grand corruption, kleptocracy as a form of crime against humanity, that's, I think, a very good strategy, a very good idea to be promoted in the international debate. Because that's it, that's precisely it. When corruption is the rule in the government, there is a negation of every fundamental basic human rights. Corruption kills kills people. And I think that we can also think at a lobbying campaign in order to promote this approach.
Thank you. Thank you for your answer, Professor Vannucci. Judge Balsamo, can I turn to you? Do you have comments on this and in the legislation question?
Yes, it is a great pleasure also for me to meet again Alberto Vannuccio, even if virtually, after our vast meetings in Pisa, where he promoted a strong commitment of the Academy towards the fight against corruption. I think that the idea that corruption should be perceived as a violation of human rights is very fruitful, for the same reasons already outlined with reference to organized crime. In my opinion, this perspective paves the way to the enhancement of the engagement of civil society, because otherwise the fight against corruption and organized crime could be considered as a matter of competence of law enforcement and judicial authorities. Instead, it is a field of action for everyone. It should be a shared commitment. I would like also to reply to some very interesting questions that were raised during the debate online. In particular, about the question raised by Ruggero Scaturro, with reference to the lack of perception of the dangerousness of corruption in itself. I fully share his point of view. In my opinion, there is a lack of awareness of the harm that corruption creates in respect of human rights, of the democracy itself. Probably we have to try to spread a different culture that underlines not only the violence of organized crime, but also the violence of a system based on corruption, which is present in some areas and maybe as dangerous as organized crime. It is no case, it is no coincidence that organized crime avails itself of corruption as a weapon, not only to gain proceeds of crime, but also to gain a strong support within the society by means of synergies with some components of the community that may appear very distant from organized crime. Corruption is the means of creating synergies between organized crime and civil society. We have to create synergies between civil society and the public institutions committed in the fight against organized crime and corruption. There is another very interesting question about a process that I would like to refer to as the circulation of criminal models, because I was impressed by the description that was made of the evolution of organized crime, making use of several forms of coercion. In my opinion, this evolution is just a change in a local context that reminds me of the changes that have involved my country, where such a process was evident in the 70s, in the 80s of the past century. I think that we should try to balance this circulation of criminal models through a circulation of legal models. Probably now are the conditions for the harmonization of legislation at an international level. Such conditions are based on some important achievements and orientations shared within the context of the United Nations, but they require something more than an only legal approach. They require a framework of values. I was also impressed by the analysis that was illustrated by Alberto Vannucci about the corruption in the judiciary. I think that no legal instrument may be sufficient unless there is an in-depth commitment within the mindset of the judiciary. The mindset of the judiciary plays a crucial role in the historical phase that was opened after the tragic events of 1992. I saw a change in our way of approaching the most serious criminal phenomena. Now I am concerned about some recent developments. It is no coincidence that the President of the Republic of Italy outlined the risks of the lack of ethical values within the judiciary, which is shown by some recent investigations. And I think that we have to try to build a bridge between ethics, economy, and justice. Probably in this respect, the role of civil society may be of the utmost importance, because we can build our identity not only on legal principles, but above all, on something that unifies the entire society. In my opinion, judges in Italy rebuilt their identity based on a new awareness of their social role, of their social accountability. We have to enhance at the same time a true independence and a true sense of social accountability. That could be a winning card for this fight we have to conduct in the next years. I think, however, that an internationalization of the fight against corruption and organized crime may be a great added value, because the mindset of the judiciary in Italy changed due to the opening of a new horizon, thanks to the forms of judicial cooperations that were developed by judges like Giovanni Falcone. We have a milestone on which we can build up our future. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this, Judge Balsamo. And I think we are running a little bit out of time, and I would like to reinforce for those that are participating of the GI cross-regional dialogues of the Western Balkan, that Walter and Christina are expecting you in the other Zoom room. And just to wrap up our conversation today, I would like to pose the question that was directed to Pavla, and the following questions that we were not able to address in this debate today, I will follow up with you by email. So Pavla, there was a question about your perception on Jan Kuczyk's assassination, and how do you think that in the European level this assassination is being perceived, if you think there is a lack of attention?
No, I don't think there's lack of attention. What I believe is that the attention is dropping. At the beginning, it was like European issue, everyone was talking about it. And because the lead suspect is still not sentenced, he was actually absolved by the first-degree court. We will need this attention to actually really properly sentence and prosecute those really involved in the murder.
Thank you for this, Pavla. And thank you all for joining this event today. A special thank you to our panelists, Giulia, Pavlu, Judge Antonio Balsamo, and Professor Vannucci. Thank you for Libera in their partnership with us today. If you want to know more about the GI and the Libera's project, please access our websites to join our Assassination Witness campaign and register to our newsletter. Go to assassination.globalinitiative.net. The GI has also launched the Resilience Fund 2021 Fellowship Program. The theme of this project, this New Year fellowship, is extortion. You can also get more information in resiliencefund.globalinitiative.net. Thank you very much for all that joined us in this conversation today. Stay in touch, stay safe. Thanks for coming.